is our very simple linear model. Uh, and the linear model for us says that um, if you motivate a student with a real context, that leads to an engagement with the issue that you want to talk in the classroom. And once the student engages, then there's a possibility of learning to happen. And once that learning builds upon many conceptual ideas, and that's the juncture when you get to see impactful learning happening. And impactful learning is a very broad conceptualization of what one does when one is able to understand a concept, be able to apply, be able to connect, be able to do things with it. One that changes one's own position in terms of their ability to execute an idea in some ways. Now, here comes my very busy slide, so please bear with me. I'll kind of take you through this in a certain manner. I thought initially of typing it in a table, but I said let me try my good notes, and it is a little bit busy, but not to worry. So what one is saying is, for impactful learning to happen, we need our students to become reflective, and this is this zone one, if you may. Become reflective, become observant. Okay, one is able to see around oneself and be able to draw ideas at the back of your mind. Second, it involves a student to discover their own strength and their passion. The strength is an important part of it, because most often than not, many of our kids understand their weaknesses, but really don't understand their strengths and how to drive through their strengths. The third part of impactful learning is to be able to formulate a challenge, which is structure a challenge. So you look at an issue around you and you say, oh, how do I structure this issue as a problem in my own mind? And then only go about solving it as a problem. And the last part is, how do I develop compassion and courage to be able to embed many of the necessary conditions or the desirability of a problem into one's own formulation, and then have the courage to be able to attempt to solve it. So here is our 4 attributes, if you may, that I would love to build in my classroom. Okay. Now, what do they require? They require a practice orientation, which is how bringing the real problem into the classroom. They also require building conceptual knowledge around them, because just an understanding of a problem in a real problem, asking a question, why are we not able to allocate oxygen in a certain equitable manner across the different states, is a statement or a formulation of an issue. But unless one understands the economics of resource allocation, the body of knowledge that is required to optimize, to create an optimal model, which is a conceptual knowledge behind it, you will just not be able to address that issue itself. The third idea is to have complementary assets. What are complementary assets that a physicist needs to have? What are other disciplines that a physicist needs to draw their learning from to make them into a better physicist? Do they need stuff coming from statistics? Do they need stuff coming from biology? Do they need stuff coming from electronics engineering? Do they need stuff coming from, who knows, social sciences in certain cases? And these are complementary assets that actually need to be combined with conceptual knowledge to be able to address real world challenges. And the last is to develop an understanding of the society. It's very crucial that one is able to understand in a nuanced way what is desired solution before one can go about defining and developing an implementable outcomes. And if I can't develop an implementable outcome, then I'm not doing impactful learning. I won't be able to solve problems and then do impactful learning. Now, so that's a description. That's in, if you may, that's the first two zones are my description of a problem. Um, then comes, okay, how do we go about? How did we go about addressing it? We kept saying, there are four ways in which students learn. They learn by developing an ability to think. They learn by developing an ability to do things, an ability to connect, and an ability to become something different. And this ability to think is what normally happens in a classroom. You lecture, you take notes, you read books, you understand, you develop deep disciplinary knowledge, and you are able to actually think better. And it's very important, but it's a necessary condition, but not sufficient condition to be able to develop impactful learning. Ability to do is the one that actually puts the engagement into picture in that linear model of motivation, engagement, learning. When you start doing, we did a very interesting experiment several years ago as part of our independent study period, or ISP, where we replaced a course on sound and acoustics with a course called Building of a Musical Instrument, the science of building musical instrument. And that allowed a very interesting way in which doing was the motivation, led to the motivation, understanding of the motivation, which is to build an instrument, and consequently learn the theory which will allow you to do it. The only thing that was not happening was that the end of the month, end of the week, the students are not solving 50 problems from the end of the chapter of the book, but they were solving a real problem. This ability to connect is another very strong way, which is completely missing in most of our educational environment. If you ask a kid, okay, they've taken a course in physics and taken a course in biology, what's common to them? They will hardly be able to connect ideas. But in today's world, to bring about a change, to bring about new innovation, you need to connect knowledge systems and ideas from one discipline to another. And lastly, education is so much about building yourself as a citizen in this society. And what does one do to build you into a more compassionate student, a more concerned student, who will search for ways to address these challenges that the larger society face. So for each one of these at Ahmdbad, we built mechanisms, deep disciplinary knowledge and research thinking, and we built majors that were very, very deep in their own domain. We built an ability where the students learn to ask the right questions through cutting edge courses that were taught by faculty who were coming from with experience or having studied at some of the best places around the world. We also, to encourage ability to do, we said our focus has to be on experiential learning. And here I would like to narrate a little bit of a journey for you that it started off by us asking, can we teach some of our existing courses in a way where they around themes that are driven by a passion, that are theoretical in nature and also doing oriented. And we created a winter term called Independent Study Period, or ISP, as you see at the bottom here. And that led to, for several years, we would run these short courses for 2 weeks and 3 weeks, and learned the art and science of doing experiential learning. We learned how do you set up a course, how do you design the curriculum syllabus for it, how do you bring in examples that will allow students to be able to do things, but not as a hobby, but as an experiential learning discipline, and as following a learning discipline through an experiential process. And that grew into what we now have a common core in our undergraduate program called the foundation program. And I won't talk about it, but my colleague, Professor Raghu Rangarajan, would talk to you about tomorrow. I think it's one of the most significant breakthroughs that we've managed to create in holistic learning, which is very novel, which is very transformative, very effective to bring about teaching and learning, both which is interdisciplinary in nature and at the same point of time experiential. And it's leading to much better learning outcomes. We have established a 4-year research project where we are measuring how the students are learning around some of the concepts and attributes that we want students to have. And we'll follow these a cohort of students for 4 years to see how things are changing. And some of the early findings for us have been very encouraging in terms, which are showing that this is a very transformative way of thinking about learning. It's not about teaching disciplines, but it's about teaching thematics, or teaching themes in which our disciplines are embedded. We also started to develop a very strong interdisciplinary focus. Much of liberal arts education, not only in India but around the world, is broad. So you have kids who come in and take courses in various buckets. They'll take some courses in humanities, some in social sciences, some in sciences, and so on and so forth. It does create a broad educational platform for students. But barely 10% of students around the world are strongly motivated to connect ideas from one discipline into another. And that's what interdisciplinary education is about. To be able to study history and be able to, when you're solving a problem in mechanical engineering, to be able to say, you know what, I think I need to know about how this material got developed over a period of time, and what are its properties, why did it happen, what were the forces that led that to happen. That's history for a mechanical engineering student. And that will bring deeper knowledge going around. And our foundation program, our minors, all, so the panel 5, if you may, panel 4 is our goals, our mechanisms that we've put in place to deliver on these abilities, the 4 ways of learning. But panel 5 are instruments that we have developed, ways in which, and programs that we've developed to actually execute some of that mechanisms. Joint teaching between a professor of computer science and a professor of biology, a professor of math and a professor of biology coming together to teach courses. We brought in professorship of practice to bring industry folks into the classroom. We have developed a very interesting program called Nalanda, where instead of having people come and lecture to large number of students, which generally doesn't work, half of them are sleeping, we decided that we should bring in very deep people who are deep thinkers and ask students to volunteer to engage with them. And that's really what this platform of Nalanda is, and it has been phenomenal in terms of building an ability to connect ideas and at the same time build independent mindedness. There's the undergraduate research program. We have strong general education where students take courses in humanities, social sciences, etc., to make themselves broad. Now, structurally, it needed certain change. To do this, experiential learning and interdisciplinary learning, so that we don't get into our own silos, we decided structurally not to have departments. So we don't have any departments. Schools are sentinel entities. And and they're quite porous. So you can be in one school and go teach in another with someone else. And that's what brings interdisciplinarity to bear. So what point I'm wanting to make is sometimes you need to break the structure under which you're operating to be able to change the conduct and behavior. And sometimes you have to change the way you conduct a certain activity in a certain manner to change behavior and learning. A school of arts and sciences, which is a classic example of this breaking of silos in quite some ways. At most places, you have a school of biology and a school of sciences and a school of humanities and a school of social sciences existing. We brought them all together because we want to have conversations between all of these domains to be able to look at a problem in a far more engaging and a new manner. And that's changing the way conversations happen. That's changing the way we look at issues from a multiple directions to be able to find newer ways to inquire about whether things work or not. And that's the richness that you then bring into your classroom to make a student that much more questioning, to make the student think a little bit more beyond the chapter which they are studying, to be able to connect an idea that they learned in some other course into their own course. And that's the real value that comes out of this nature of interdisciplinary learning. The last thing that I want to point to you in this is, in order to change the way we teach, we have to change the way we are in the classroom, both teachers and students. This ability to become comes through an engagement with the larger society. How can you consume water at home and not be able to think about large number of people who have to trudge, several kilometers every day to collect water to drink? How can you not think, if you're a environmental scientist or engineer, and how can you work on water, not think about the queues that get formed outside in certain areas of the city when for people who have to wait and give up on their livelihood or their education? That's a very important part of becoming a very engaged learner in the classroom. And that, in addition to our foundation program, we do this through it's an anachronistic way of saying it, but very mandatory volunteerism, where every student engages with social problems around the world. Now, this is a broad framework that we have been working towards. Some of it is started as a framework. Some of it are experiments that got done and have now been added post hoc, is part of a framework. But these are directions that one can take to create a change in the way we teach and learn. Now, this change management also, I'll take just 2 or 3 minutes, and for many of you to require, how do you change from an existing situation to something different that you want to do? And it requires communication and an understanding of the big picture. It requires an ability where everybody is in the same on the same plane, where they speak the same terminology, where people don't feel insecure in doing experiments. That if my experiment fails, what will happen? Most experiments fail, and it's okay for an experiment to fail. But that one that succeeds out of 10 that we do, it's the one that actually covers up for all these failures. We need to focus on early adopters. Any change management process, you will find that they're early adopters. When we started bringing about these change, we looked at people who were ready to run with it, and there were some, and they became the early champions. And then the others joined in as this story started to evolve. And it also requires rewarding people who are bringing about these kind of changes. So to conclude, strategic choices about making change in curriculum, in programs, in classrooms, is a multi-year effort. It has to be deliberate. It has to be curated. It has to be authentic. Um, it has to and it has to have the sense that you're running a marathon and it's not a sprint. It requires immense amount of hard work. It will give you very slow gains over a period of time, but we must not sacrifice the great for the good. We should see the good